this is Newscafe, your weekly program, Focus of the Week, and today's focus is Georgian dramaturgy. Our host is the playwright of Royal District Theatre, Davit Gabunia, and I'm the host, Elene Chachava. So I'll take the first question to him. The theatrical theatre said that the Royal District Theatre moves better meet the challenges of Georgian dramaturgy of present world. So what are the challenges?
Well, to speak particularly about playwriting, you mean, or theatre in general?
In general, I think.
Okay, so first of all, the challenge number one will be the content. And will be the approach how the theatres build their repertoires, because apparently there is no clear repertoire policy. So what they choose to produce, what they choose to have on stage, and how actual and important is what they produce, what plays they choose, and then it is very chaotic most of the time, and only very few theatres have realized and have a particular tendency to follow what to choose, what to produce. So this will be the number one challenge, I would say. And if we speak about technical challenges or some...
let's start the most crucial issue, financial issue.
So financial issue, I wouldn't say that Georgian theatre, at least in Tbilisi, well, let's concentrate on the theatres based in Tbilisi. They are quite well subsidized, because otherwise it would be impossible for them to function. As you know, the town is not that large, and the audience and the ticket sales are not not enough to survive for the theatres financially. So that's why it must be, and it is subsidized by the state, by the Ministry of Culture mostly, and by the municipality in some cases, like our case. So Royal District Theatre has received the municipal funding this year, and which helps us greatly to move on and to survive in this wild...
How to save yourself with this small audience, or...?
I wouldn't say the audience is small, but and in our case it is mostly the young audience and students and the younger people under 30, which are the majority of our audience. But still, you know, the ticket prices are very low, and if you compare the expenses to the income, what it gives, so the economical balance is always negative. Even for the theatres, for the bigger theatres, when they have some successful shows and when they sell a lot of tickets and it's sold out, it's still not enough for the theatre to survive, to function normally. So that's why these subsidies and the help from the state is crucially important for theatres. And I wouldn't say that in this regard Georgian theatres are not getting anything. Yes, they do. They are getting quite good financing from the state, but not in all cases this is enough for the theatre to be a good theatre. Because so my point is that money is not, and the funding is not the only challenge and the only problem for theatres nowadays in Georgia.
Now I want to touch the technologies issue also, how to manage with these small finances to use it. It's a problem of all theatres in Georgia. Yes.
It is a big problem of all theatres, and especially for those bigger theatres like the national theatres, because when you have a big stage and you have to have some spectacular shows oriented on the visual side, so it is still a problem for Georgia. Because, for example, I would start with mentioning the lighting design. We don't have lighting designers at all in Georgia. So if you take an British or American or whatever, German, any theatre there and their shows, and if you have a look at the program, so lighting designer is a separate person who does the lighting design. There is a set designer, costume designer, director, and so on, but the lighting design is a separate area which is taught at the professional schools, and people are educated to learn this. And in our cases we are in a very poor state, and they're mostly even bigger theatres who have the good equipment compared to the smaller ones, so they still are not using it in a proper way, and they still are using it as a concert lighting, as a theater lighting, but these are conceptually very different things. And if you have a look at those shows that come to visit Georgia and Tbilisi, or both festivals, and if you see sometimes they have some of them have quite complicated lighting design, and if you see how they work and you compare their lighting work to the Georgian shows, so you will see the difference. It's a completely different story, and unfortunately we do have this problem. So besides about technical things, when we mentioned that the theaters receive the subsidies, that they are subsidized and they have some funding, so they are not starving utterly, we always forget that those fascinating Western shows we really admire, some of us having seen them on stage abroad, or some of the shows have been brought to Tbilisi as well, the festivals. So we always keep forgetting that to acquire that quality, that standard, to have this kind of visual side, every single show needs a lot of money, which is not affordable in Georgian situation. I don't mean that the money would solve the problem, only money would solve the problem, but...
So like a professional staff, you mean?
Both, so technical staff and both the funding, because it's like if we take my favorite theater, Berlin, in Berlin, which is called Schaubühne, one of the leading theaters, and if you have a look at their shows, how mesmerizing it is visually, how stunning. So and then if you take their technical rider and if you calculate the budget, so how much it would cost to produce such a show, so it will be a yearly budget of a Georgian theater, which makes it impossible for us to achieve that level of technical skills or technical perfection. But I still want to repeat myself, stating that it is not only funding that would change this situation. This is a very slow development in every. Yeah, it's very complex, but it is both money and the knowledge. And
yes, about knowledge, I wanted to ask how our universities can provide you with well-educated or actors, screenplayers, or.
As for playwriting, so there are very rarely some. Now, for example, that there is no department for playwriting at the Film and Theatre School or university. So that's why we can forget about this. Like new playwrights very rarely emerge from that university, but they do have this acting and directing classes. But it is very problematic as well, because. Yes, of course, new actors appear every year, but I'm not an expert of the educational sphere, and I cannot be like 100% sure about the education problems. But it is very obvious, and even not sophisticated look can detect the problems there. And the problems are mostly. The problem can be stated as follows. So it is an unqualified education. The qualification is not enough, and maybe the programs and the approaches they're using need serious revision and updating, I would say. And but I don't see the one and easy way out of this, because it is a system that functions and that has been functioning for years, and it has its like own rules and traditions, and it won't be so easy to change it. And then besides, there is no single right or wrong way, because in the education in this field, acting especially and directing, is not a hard science. So it's not like physics or biology. So you need to learn this certain knowledge you have to accumulate it, and then there will be a result maybe. But in this case, it's very controversial. So you cannot change one thing. You cannot change one particular thing in education, and that will have, and it will mean that you will have a guaranteed result. There is no guarantee in it, unfortunately.
So what about the connection with outer world? So how we change information between foreign theaters or
I would say that last 10 years maybe, or even less, have been crucial in this direction, because before that, in Soviet times, well, you know better than me, and everyone knows how it was functioning like that because of the Iron Curtain and everything, so it was closed. And very few exceptions, very few companies had the chance to go out and to see something and to show their work outside this Soviet Union borders. But last 10 years, why I mentioned 10 particularly, because together with alongside with the development of internet and the availability of a lot of things on
it's possible to interchange information,
yes.
right?
It is just a simple thing as YouTube, development of YouTube caused that we have watched a lot of things we had never dreamt of we could have seen in our lives. And besides that, there are the possibilities, the borders are more or less open now, and the possibilities of traveling to Europe or United States is more and more available for more people. So, and nowadays, if a person is, as a Georgian saying says, that it's boiling in its own juice, as we would say it in Georgian. So it is the person's problem already. So it's not, we cannot blame the environment, we cannot blame the outside world that if we are not aware of the processes that are ongoing in Western theatre, because now it is much easier to get the information, much easier to go somewhere, to see the shows in other theatres, to read the books.
For example, international festivals like GIF, does it help to make the level higher in Georgia?
I wouldn't say that it has such a direct influence on like improvement of Georgian theatre, but certainly international festivals are very important, because just how to say, it attracts the attention not only of the professionals, of the theatre professionals, but the audiences as well, the general audience, and the people who never been interested in theatre start to come back to theatre, how to say, and revert to theatre, because they are interested in those big international shows, and then it causes the general interest towards theatre. So it is very beneficial for Georgian theatre as well. Besides, the Tbilisi International Festival of Theatre has a Georgian program as well, a Georgian showcase, which is meant to promote Georgian theatre abroad. And they would invite, every year they invite some theatre professionals from all over the world, like 40-50 people, including producers, directors, some festival directors. And they have the chance to see the showcase of Georgian theatre every year, and it gives us a very particular and very tangible results, including like guest performances abroad and collaborations with international partners, and like building the contacts, and it is very important. Of course, it is very important, and but the result is always something, how to say, you can never build a very exact correlation between these two. So whether this some kind of improvement was caused by a festival or not, so we can never say that 100% sure, but certainly it influences us, and it's a great thing that we have these two big festivals in Tbilisi, in Georgia, and we have the chance to meet and to see what's going on in the world.
Okay, but 70s were considered the golden age of Georgian theatre, right? Tumanishvili period. And what we lack now at this moment?
So I'm against of this classifications, maybe because I'm not the theatre critic, that's why, and it's not my business to do that, but
it's generally accepted.
Yes, it's generally accepted, and it was really a big success of Georgian theatre, including Tumanishvili and Erli Storua and so on and so on. But I would not say that I would not compare those times to what's happening today, because this is not right. The context is completely different, and the art is not something those who believe that art is just a self-expression of a director and then based only on his talent or her talent is, to my mind, very, very wrong. Because art is never born out of context, out of political, out of economic, out of general social context. So it is always the right person, the director, in the right context that creates, or the right actors that collaborate, and this is something more collective than one can imagine. So this is not only that someone, a genius, was born on himself or herself and brought up and did this marvelous things in art. I don't believe in that. So that's why the context is very different now from the 70s, when there was the censorship and you had to find the ways how to lure what you wanted to say and how to lie skillfully so that the censorship would accept what you were doing on stage. But now it's completely different, and it happens so that we are now free, more or less, and there is no apparent or obvious censorship, so do whatever you want. But this freedom turned out to be very difficult, because freedom means brings with it how to say responsibility, and then the responsibilities are difficult, and we don't like responsibilities generally. It's a human nature to try to avoid these responsibilities, and how important it is to work on yourself, and how important it is to be not to work a lot, and to give the audience something which was born based on or came out of a lot of work. This is the problem of Georgian theatre nowadays, because the works we see on stage are very often, if I can put it like that, as a fast made and not carefully thought about. Because very few directors, very few exceptions, think about what they really have to say, and how they have to react to the context of aforementioned, like social, economic, or political context, or the environment, how they reflect on that, and their products are very rarely based on this reflection. So this is main problem, I would say. I would not say that the economic problem and the funding or technical problems are the number one. Problem number one would be the content, how and what we are doing, and how we are reflecting on the environment we're living in. So this is the most acute problem, but not the funding and technical issues.
What would you change, for example, in legislation? Are there any issues that will help just develop Georgian dramaturgy?
When you're saying dramaturgy, what do you mean? You mean playwright?
Of course.
Okay, because in general, the question with the things we were talking about is like in general about theater, but particularly about playwriting. One thing is, I'm dead sure about that. Without developing contemporary local playwriting, it's impossible to have any sort of progress in theater at all, because theater has always been the reflection on what's going on around you, and as Tumanishvili, if we quote his famous words, the theater is made for the people who live around you. It's a very rough translation of his famous words. That is to say that theater should never forget the context, and the best reflection on the context and best reflection on the life around you is only possible through the local and through, in our case, Georgian playwriting and contemporary playwriting. And unfortunately, playwriting and the drama has never been the strongest point of Georgian literature historically. Maybe because our theater started to develop very late in comparison to like big theatrical countries in Europe. So only in 19th century, and there have been very few big names in Georgian playwriting. So this lack of tradition is, of course, important, and it's somehow it's an obstacle. But as for the contemporary playwriting, yes, we do have contemporary playwrights who write plays, and they are produced, and there is nothing to complain about. But there is this. I would change one thing in this, that theaters should have permanent or more or less like yearly, some 2 years, 3 years contracts with playwrights, or the playwrights should be at the theaters, working at the theaters, because in this case, normally nowadays in Georgia, so a playwright would write a play and then it is produced, and it is playwright and theater are quite separated from each other. So playwrights normally don't work at theaters, so they are not included in the rehearsal process, so they are not involved in this life, which is very wrong, I would say, because best Western practices show us that the playwrights are commissioned plays by theaters, and then when they finish the first draft, then the drafts are revised and adjusted and so on and so on. So this is the working process, and it gives the good result when the playwright is working together with the theater or at the theater. So this I would change if it were up to me, and we are trying to do this at the Royal District Theatre, where it is really up to me, like, because besides being a playwright and translator, so I'm the head of the literary department here, and so we're trying to do this. We're trying to somehow establish this practice that the playwright must work at the theatre.
So to sum up our dialogue, in the 21st century, for example, in the digital world, what should theatre do to attract more audiences?
So it's a hard life for theatre, of course, because the competition is so high. And but competition is high in the field of entertainment, I would say. And
but it has its certain audience always.
Of course. But entertainment, I'm not saying that the entertaining theatre should not exist. So my last play produced here was a comedy, for example. It should exist, of course, and it has all rights to exist. But it will be very hard if the theatre takes this route and this path that it will be only oriented on entertainment. Of course, it will lose, because you can never compete with digital technologies. You can never compete with cinema, you can never compete with television, which is the killer of all arts, all forms of arts, including cinema, by the way. So in this case, theatre has one main thing, which is the exclusive thing it has. So none of the arts has it. So which is, I call it life. So a live performance, when an actor standing on stage next to you and looking into your eyes and sense his or her impulses or energy and the voice, it cannot be compared to anything else. Like if we take the analogy, if we compare with the classical music concert, when you're sitting in the audience and when you're listening to a live performance of a concert, it's completely different from what you can hear from the recording. So this component of being alive, being bringing life onto stage in all senses, is the only way theatre can survive with, and be actual, be up to date, be alive, and then no one can beat this. Because when I was mentioning that our theatre has mostly a young audience, so this is the fact that proves this, my words are true, because maybe more or less true, because who could imagine that young people who are so much and so much into this 21st century things would come to theatre, and some of them would come perpetually, like return all the time and see the same show for many times, and which makes me happy and gives me a tiny little hope that we are on the right path.
Interesting statement. So we had emotional ending. This was, thank you so much. It was Focus of the Week. Goodbye.